on average, just in the United States, about 220 people die every single day from an opiate overdose. And by the time we finish this show, 8 to 10 people are going to die from an opiate overdose. If we get even one person, one viewer with this program that we might be able to help with some of the information that's shared on here, then it's all worth it.
Romy. I'm here with Glenn Victor. Shout out to everyone on the daremepodcast.
Yeah. Oh, you rock. Thank you, Romy. How about that? Hey, everyone. Welcome to the Dare Me podcast. How about that girl, Romy, giving us a shout out for the Dare Me podcast. I met Romy at a show last night, and oh my God, man, it was so freaking cool. I got to admit, I was kind of starstruck, but she was so nice. She was so approachable, so cool to me, as you can tell in watching that short shout out video clip we just played. Anyway, I'm going to talk about her a little bit more in a second. Welcome and peace, everybody. Welcome to the Dare Me podcast. I see we already got several viewers and listeners. Welcome to the show, y'all. And just a friendly reminder, we have a live chat room. You can send comments and join in the program and the conversation if you like. I am so excited about tonight's show, y'all. We have a great guest lined up. Our friend Melissa Dawn is on the show, and she's going to be telling her amazing story of survival and addiction and recovery. And then we're also going to talk with her about her life coaching business. And we'll give some contact information if that's something you're interested in finding more out about. And by the way, if you're a regular viewer or listener to the Dare Me podcast, you may recall we've had Melissa on in the past, and we've had quite a few people asking us to have her back. So we're so excited to have her back tonight. She is in the green room right now, as we say, standing by. Hang on, Melissa, we'll be with you in just a second here. But I need to talk about something briefly. This is ordinarily the time that we bring on our co-host and producer, Dean Baker, live from Orlando, Florida. Which, by the way, I'm coming to you live from Sacramento, California, and we are live right now here on the Dare Me podcast. We're live on about a half dozen different Facebook pages, half dozen different YouTube channels. We're live on LinkedIn. We're live on X. We're live on Threads, all the things coming to you live. And we ordinarily would be bringing Dean in live from Orlando. However, Dean had a horrible accident yesterday. He's okay, by the way. He messaged me not too long ago that he's okay. And if you're watching, Dean, holding it down without you here, bro. We're kind of flying by the seat of our pants today, but I think it's going to go smoothly. Dean had a motorcycle mishap. I know some of y'all follow Dean on his social media where he takes these rides on his motorcycle and has the GoPro camera and all. And he posts some really cool stuff. Well, he had kind of a freak accident and he broke his leg. So, yeah, our boy Dean Baker, our co-host and producer, went into surgery this morning for a broken leg. And he is laid up in the hospital. And so he called me and I didn't want to cancel on our guest Melissa today. And he's like, Glenn, you can do this. You got this. Okay. And he said, I'm going to walk you through a couple things. And, he said, man, you've done this kind of stuff before, which I have. I've produced different shows and things. It's just, man, I'll tell you what, you don't realize how much work some of your team does till you got to do what they do too. Dean truly is a rock star with producing this program. So I worked hard on putting together today's presentation. And if I seem a little distracted at times during the show today, y'all, it's because in addition to talking and communicating with Melissa, I'm going to be kind of juggling some production things on the side that Dean ordinarily does. In any case, we want to send our well wishes to our friend, our colleague, our co-host, our producer for the Dare Me podcast, Dean Baker, who is probably watching us live right now, laid up in his hospital bed back in Orlando, recovering from surgery today for a broken leg. And Dean, we can't wait to have you back on the show next week. So anyhow, wanted to talk a little bit about that, y'all. And welcome to the Dare Me podcast. I see we got more people jumping aboard. We always like to give people just a couple of minutes to get on board with the show once we get started. And we are so excited, as I mentioned, about tonight's show, y'all, because we really got a great guest lined up who we're going to bring on in just a moment. That girl, Melissa Dunn. She is such a great person, y'all. And we're going to bring her on in just a moment. But I wanted, and by the way, here's a picture I snatched from Melissa's social media. She did some, I guess what you call like some glamour shots to promote her life coaching and, business and all. And isn't she beautiful? Oh my God. And so we'll have her on in just a moment. But first, y'all, I got to just send a quick shout out to that girl, Romy, who I mentioned and gave us the shout out at the beginning of the show. Romy uh, has been nominated for a Grammy. And so we're going to talk about that in just a little bit, y'all. But I want to just do a brief introduction to the podcast because I see we've got quite a few people on board now. And we get new viewers and listeners every week to the show. Of course, we have our regulars. We love y'all. Thank you so much for tuning in every week. But from week to week to week, we get new viewers and listeners all the time, and we hear from them every week. A lot of times people just be scrolling, see us live, and say, man, what's this Dare Me podcast about? And they'll click and, start watching or listening to the show. So welcome if you're new to the Dare Me podcast. We hope you stay with us. We hope you enjoy the content. And just to give you a brief description what this podcast is even all about, what's this Dare Me all about? It's all about the topics that we talk about on here, which include drugs, addiction, recovery, enlightenment, music, exercise, all the things that we talk about on this podcast include those topics. And yeah, if I seem like I'm looking off to the side here a little bit, y'all, like I said, ordinarily Dean would be flashing some hashtags across the top of the screen right now. And I'm just not finding that particular screenshot, but I'll find it in a second. In any case, the name Dare Me stands for those topics I just mentioned. If you look closely at the letters in the name, and the name Dare Me was all about dare me to do this podcast, to come out and talk openly about my struggles with addiction. And, I've talked openly about it on this podcast many a times. We are into, by the way, episode 38 of this show. And I've told my story in great detail on many episodes. So you go back, if you go to the Dare Me Podcast YouTube channel, click on that videos tab, you'll see all the episodes there. And you can hear my story in great detail. I'm happy to say I've been clean now for over 2.5 years, coming up on 2 years and 9 months. I have a long struggle in history with addiction. This last time around, I broke my ankle and I got prescribed opioid pain medication, y'all, and I got hooked. It was horrible getting off that stuff. But again, as I mentioned, so grateful to be clean again. And once I got clean this time around, I decided to do this podcast and see if we might be able to help, as we say in that intro to the show, even one person. So that's the brief rundown to what this show is all about, y'all. And that is a very short version of my story. But I didn't want to go too long into it today because I want to go ahead and bring our guest aboard now because I know she's standing by. So I'm going to do that right now. and bring aboard Melissa. There she is. Melissa, can you hear me okay?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
I hear you loud and clear. Welcome to the Dare Me podcast, Melissa. We're so glad to have you here with us today. And you must forgive me, I'm playing with the screenshots. I know you heard me talking about poor Dean broke his leg. Uh, and I didn't want to cancel on you because we had this planned and I was putting like promo reels out there and all that stuff. And he literally kind of let me know at the 11th hour there's nothing he could do. And I said, all right. He goes, you got this, Glenn. You got this. So I'm kind of juggling a couple different things at the same time, but so happy to have you on today. And by the way, Melissa, as you can see in her title there, y'all, is coming to us live from the Midwest in Detroit, Michigan. What's the weather up there like today, Melissa? Or tonight, I should say. Is it cold?
Yeah, it's cold, a little rainy, but it's tolerable.
Yeah, well, for those who don't know, that is my hometown. I grew up in the Midwest. I lived in Detroit, Michigan until I was like 29 years old. Then I moved to Central Florida where I lived 30 years. And now I live out here in Sacramento to be near my daughter. I've been out here for over a year now. But Detroit will always be home to me, Melissa. And, I come back and visit at least once or twice a year, usually, because I got lots of family there and all. And by the way, I should probably mention that's how you and I met because you're friends with one of my family members. Well, even more than one, but um, we met and became friends when we both attended the World Convention of Narcotics Anonymous in Orlando, Florida, back in, I think that was 2017. It was before the pandemic, right? It might have been 2018. Does that sound about right to
Yeah, I
you?
think it was like 18 or 19.
Yeah, yeah. And so I'm just being honest, y'all. Melissa and I talked about this briefly before we went on the air. I was in a full-blown relapse at the time. I mentioned briefly before we brought you on, Melissa, that I was, in that opioid relapse after I broke my ankle, and I was trying to hide it from people, which is kind of common. People relapse, and I never thought in a million years I would go to an NA convention, much less NA meeting, using or high, but I did because I still had the desire to get clean. And thank God for that tradition in the 12-step programs, whether it's NAAA, fucking A, whatever, that the only requirement for membership is a desire to stop using. Because as I jokingly but half serious say, man, they would have kicked my ass out a long time ago. You know what I mean? But for me, Melissa, having relapsed, I found it to be true, the old saying that once you got NA in you, man, going back out using ain't never the same because, during my relapse, I knew that I was fucking up. And so I still had the desire. And that's why I went to that convention because I was still struggling trying to get clean. And I'm so grateful I met you there. And it's just so bizarre in life how things, transpire because who would have thought, was that like 5 or 6 years ago, jump forward. Here I am now with, 2 years, almost 2 years, 9 months clean, and you and I doing a podcast together. Isn't that crazy?
It's beautiful. I love it.
Yes. Well, hey, I see we got somebody in the comments. Oh, we want to say a shout out to Eric Taylor, who's in our chat room. Eric is coming to us live from Orlando, Florida in the chat room. And so, by the way, if, man, we got a whole shit ton of viewers and listeners, by the way, Melissa, I can see how many are tuned in. So welcome to all of y'all. Thank you for joining the podcast. And just a friendly reminder, everybody watching, listening, you too can jump in the live chat if you would like to. So shout out Eric T from Orlando. Thanks for joining the show today, Eric. So yeah, Melissa, I if you'll indulge me for just a moment, because I'm anxious to hear your story again. I've heard your story, by the way, as I've mentioned on here. Of course, we met at that convention, which I know Eric was at, by the way, too. And then jump forward when I was kicking dope, when I got clean this last time. I went from Orlando all the way back to Detroit and was staying at one of my sister's house. I have 4 sisters, by the way, y'all. I talk about it a lot on this podcast, but if you're a new viewer or listener, yeah, I was raised by 4 strong, independent women, and not to mention my mom too. So yeah, I got talked into going home, if you will, to Detroit because I didn't want to go back into treatment. And so my sister and some others that kind of intervened, knew I was using, talked me into going back to Michigan, and I kicked in my sister's basement. And then I started going to meetings again. And if you recall, Melissa, that's where you and I bumped into each other again. I hadn't seen you in, a few years. And you told your story at this Sunday night meeting I was going to. I think it's called the GOD meeting. Is that what it was?
Yeah.
And I had never heard your story before. And oh my God, blew me away. And to this day, so inspirational to me and so motivational. And so I'm excited for you to tell your story some more on the show tonight. But before we get into that, and I promise we're going to get to it in just a second, y'all. I know some people are probably like, okay, Glenn, shut the hell up. Let her tell her story. But like I said, if you'll indulge me for just a second, Melissa, I do got to do this shout out to Romy. And I want to talk just briefly about this show last night because it was so much fun, y'all. So much fun. And as I mentioned, she's been nominated for a Grammy and she's on tour right now. And I pulled this. She did some shows overseas in London and different places. And then she came to the States this past week. She did 2 sold out shows in LA. And then last night, a sold out show in San Francisco at this place right here that's called Bimbo's 365. And by the way, that place is historic. It's got a long, rich history going back to 1936. And I actually did a little tour of that place on the podcast. If you go to our Dare Me Podcast YouTube channel, go back to episode 27. I don't want to do it tonight and take up too much time, but I do a whole video tour of the inside of the place. I went and saw that girl, Mall Red. Shout out Mall Red if you see this there. And was there last night. And yeah, man, got to meet Romy. Now, if you don't know who Romy is, she is from this group called the XX. And in the XX are these other guys, Oliver and Jamie. And they all do solo stuff together. And Romy is out there touring for this album that she's been nominated for the Grammy for. Now, if the XX sounds familiar, but you can't place it, y'all, they have several great songs, but one of them is this tune called I Dare You. And if you look closely in this picture with the group, you can see they're there with Millie Bobby Brown. And she was in that video. And here's an article I pulled of Romy talking about how great it was to work with Millie Bobby Brown. And you can tell she's a little bit younger there because this goes back to 2017 too. Millie Bobby Brown's actually married now. And also in that video was the one and only Paris Jackson, Michael Jackson's daughter. And her and Millie Bobby Brown were in that video. And here's another picture of them together. And so I just thought we'd show that because I want people to understand who the XX are and who Romy is, because it was just so cool to go to her show and meet her last night. And by the way, in addition to being nominated for this Grammy, she also got a shout out from a pretty famous person on his podcast that she was a guest on. Take a look and a listen to this clip real quick, y'all. Check this out.
Candidate for Album of the Year, without question.
Oh my gosh. Wow. Thank you, Elton.
Yeah, how about that? Let's play it again.
Candidate for Album of the Year, without question.
Oh my gosh. Wow. Thank you, Elton.
Yeah, I couldn't resist showing that, y'all. Elton John gave a shout out to Romy, and I got to meet her last night. So, nanner, nanner. I love the name drop on this podcast. I do it all the time. No shame here, y'all. I was kind of starstruck. So, anyways, with all that said, Melissa, thank you for indulging me. I am so happy to have you on the podcast. By the way, I want to go back in the chat room. Okay, I was talking about my sisters, y'all. And my sister Carol is a regular viewer and listener of this podcast. Shout out, Carol.
Hi,
She's in
Carol.
the chat room. If Melissa says hi, Carol, and she says, "Who's your favorite sister?" Well, Carol, I can't answer that question and get myself in trouble, but I'm glad I read that comment when I did, because it's the perfect transition into what I want to talk about right now. And then I'm going to shut up and we're going to hear Melissa. I've been promoting Melissa this week with some different reels and promos for the show. In case you haven't seen them, I know you saw some of them. I could tell that this show was all about the girls and, one for the girls and that whole kind of thing, because I know with your life coaching that you do, it's geared toward the girls. And I, as I mentioned, just love strong, independent girls and women. I was raised by four sisters and my mom. For those who know me well and have followed the podcast, I've been married twice. I'm actually friends with both of my ex-wives, believe it or not. I got a beautiful daughter who I love so much. So yeah, I have some very strong, independent, powerful women in my life. And part of the reason I wanted to do that run up to, talking with you, Melissa, about Romy is because there again, talk about another strong, independent woman. And girls like Millie Bobby Brown, Paris Jackson, the girls are so inspirational to me. With all that said, I'll also say, and not to necessarily make gender differences, my experience has been, and please correct me if I'm wrong, Melissa, that sometimes when it comes to recovering from addiction and substance abuse disorder, and some of the issues and challenges come with that, it can become a little bit tougher, I think, for the girls sometimes. Would you agree with that statement?
So, I mean, I can't speak from the opposite, but I can say I think that we have a different set of challenges for sure. I think it
Mm-hmm.
would be safe to say that each of us experiences recovery a little bit different. And for me personally, a big part of my journey was sitting at men's tables too. So I could get a fresh perspective and a different perspective. So I think we both recover in different ways. And I do think we face a unique set of challenges. So yeah, I mean, I think the way that we experience the world is definitely different.
Yeah. Well, you know what? I'm glad you said that the way you did, Melissa, because, and pardon me for playing with this camera, but like I said, Dean's not with us here today. I'm just trying to get a good camera shot. I think that's a good one right there. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah. Yep.
Okay. So, and by the way, if you're just joining us, y'all, our producer and co-host Dean Baker is not with us tonight. Unfortunately, he broke his freaking leg in a freak motorcycle mishap that happened literally like late last night. So I'm kind of manning both things here, hosting and production. So if I seem a little distracted at times during the show, that's the reason why. And I was just kind of playing with the camera angles and want to get Melissa front and center. And I think this is a pretty good one here, Melissa. But in any case, I just thought we'd talk about the whole gender difference thing briefly, because I don't, necessarily agree with this old saying around the 12-step programs, if you will, of men with the men and women with the women. Now, I get the reason behind it. I totally get that there is, in fact, predatory behavior that can take
Mhm.
place in the program sometimes. Uh, on both the male side as well as the female side, and not even necessarily always predatory behavior as much as, young people's hormones raging and all. And so people talk about, getting a sponsor, that you should probably get one of the same gender. Now I'm a little bit older. I'm going to be 62 freaking years old in February. I have a female sponsor. Now she's been around the program for quite a while. In fact, shout out Shay Shay. She just celebrated 18 years clean, and I certainly have many great male friends in the program that I communicate with and confide in on certain things and talk to on a regular basis. It's just, I don't know. For me, like I guess maybe it has a little bit to do with my history. Like I said, growing up with four sisters, and having been married a couple times and things to that nature, there are certain things I tend to communicate with females about a lot better. In fact, if you don't mind me saying, Melissa, you and I had a conversation just a couple days ago where I was talking about how I appreciated, because I do follow you on social media, as you know, and I appreciated some of the things you were posting about boundaries and how much that helped me to understand that people have boundaries, and my expectations of whatever relationship I may have with them, and I don't mean on a romantic level. I'm talking about whether it's with friends, colleagues, family members, what have you. Their boundaries may be different than what my expectations of the relationship are, and I really appreciate what you said when we were talking. There's no playbook for some of this kind of shit. Is that, your perspective on that?
Oh yeah, no, 100%. I mean, it's for me, having boundaries is a way of protecting myself and others.
Yeah.
And so it's been a journey of learning about what that looks like for me, but also respecting other people's, because even though a person's boundary might not always make me comfortable, I am going to always cheer somebody on for doing what's best for them, even if it affects me in a way that doesn't feel good. So yeah, I mean, there's definitely no playbook for this stuff.
Wow. I'm so glad you said what you just did, because that's something I remember about what you posted is, hey, setting your boundary might make me uncomfortable, but good for you for doing it, because we don't always want to, almost even be like, self-defeating, if that's the right way to say it. Hey, by the way, I see we got a shout out. I think this is a friend of yours. I put it on the screen. How do you say? Is it Beline? Says,
Raylene.
yeah, so happy and proud of you. Shout out, Beline. Yeah, thanks for watching and tuning into the show today. And again, I see we got a whole bunch of people watching and listening. Welcome to the Dear Me podcast show. You too are welcome to join live in the chat. And she says, haha, by the way, call me V. So, okay, we'll call her V. There you go.
Okay.
All right. Well, hey, now that we've, killed some time, which, by the way, I know sometimes I go on and on, but I just want to remind our viewers and listeners, I do that by design. And kind of like killing about a half hour on the front end of the show, talking about, the purpose of the show and kind of leading up to our conversation with who our guest is, because it gives people time to jump on the show. And we got quite a few on there now. So now we're going to go into talking with our guest, Melissa Dunn, who, again, I'm so excited to have you on the show today, Melissa. I really am. And hear a little bit more from you. And by the way, I wanted to say, and I don't mean to cover your face there again, but there we go. You were on the show back on episode 13 when we talked about the God thing, because one of the things I mentioned on the front end of the show, this podcast is about drugs, addiction, recovery, enlightenment too, and spirituality. And there's a picture of you, and you can see we got that boy Steve, Lawrence, and Shebang, and there's Dean at the bottom there. And this is from the Dare Me Podcast YouTube channel. It was called Opiates and the God Thing. And then here's another picture of you. I kind of got a kick out of this. You were obviously in some deep thought talking about that. So I don't want to make you nervous, Melissa, before we get into your story. But back in them days, that was back in June. We were about, 13 episodes in. Like I said, this is episode 38 of the podcast. We were getting about a few hundred viewers per show. Well, we've grown quite a bit since then, because here's a recap of the month of October. And I thought this was timely to show tonight because this past week, if you're on social media, everybody and their brother was posting their Spotify year-end wrap of how many views or their listening habits or whatever. Well, I get these analytics from YouTube. And again, keeping in mind, we're on all these other platforms too, like Threads and X and Facebook. This is just YouTube. So it's even more than what it's showing here. But for the YouTube, we had 2.7 thousand people tune into the podcast that last week of October. Well, November was a big month for us. We grew. This is the middle of November, from 2.7 thousand to 4.4. Well, then we got a recap, our November recap, and it said we had a record number of people tune into the podcast. Any guess, Melissa, how many you think we jumped to? Because we went from 2.4 or 2.7 to 4.4 to our recap of November. What do you think? You want to take a guess at it?
I'm going to let you reveal to the people.
Okay, the big reveal. 7,000 people tuned into our podcast in November. Freaking blows my mind, y'all. I can't believe it. Can you believe it, Melissa, that this podcast has grown that much since we started it? I just can't even believe it.
I can believe it. I think that it's a really great place for people in recovery to have some identification and support and just kind of relax a little bit.
Yeah.
I absolutely believe it. I'm so proud of what you built.
Oh, thank you for saying that. And I really appreciate what you just said, giving people a place to just relax a little bit. Because obviously, if you're watching this podcast or a regular viewer listener, you can tell we keep it pretty loose on here. This is a loose format. As I often say, anything can happen live. And sometimes it does on this show. We've had some pretty bizarre things happen. But hey, we just go with the flow and we keep it real and we keep it raw and we keep it live. We thought about just posting recorded versions of this show, but there's something to be said about going live. There really is. And we love that we're able to take live people in the chat room and things to that nature. So again, Melissa, not to make you nervous or anything, but we're about to hear your story, and we're getting over 7,000 people tuning into this podcast now. So
I've been training for this marathon for a while, so
yeah, I know you have. And you know what? You said you're proud of what we're doing with this podcast, and I just got to tell you, thank you for the props. I also will say this, and I don't want to sound condescending, but I am so proud of you too. A better way to say it is I'm proud to call you friend, because as I mentioned, not only is your message inspirational and motivational to me, but I know it is to many, 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 many countless others too. And I am so proud and happy to see what you're doing with your life coaching business, which we're going to talk about and do a little deep dive into here as the podcast progresses here. But before we get into your life coaching skills and all that kind of thing, we've reached the point where, now I'd love to hear you tell your journey. And I know we got a lot of people tuned in right now, viewers and listeners, wanting to hear your journey of recovery from the substance abuse disorder and the addiction and the whole thing. So with all that said, let me kind of, shut up and let you do some talking, Melissa. How did things start for you on that path? And how'd you end up where you are now?
Oh, wow. So it's always interesting whenever I share my story, because there really is no preparing. Like anytime I have ever tried to prepare for a speech or a talk, it doesn't work for me. So I'm just going to shoot from the hip.
From the heart.
Yeah, from the heart. I'm shooting from the heart.
There you go. Yeah.
So I do want to keep this heavily recovery related, but I think to tell a little bit about my story and how what led me to recovery is also really, really important. I think it allows people to identify with me. So a little bit about me is I was raised mainly by my mom for the first half of my life, I would say. Sometimes my father, both of them were addicts and struggling with untreated trauma. So I grew up moving around a lot. Okay. I was around a lot of people, new schools, new homes on a really, really regular basis. And so although my mother did her absolute best to, provide me with a stable home, at times we experienced a lot of neglect and addiction, mental health issues. And by the time I was a teenager, I had already been introduced to self-medication with drugs and alcohol. It was like, that was how my family bonded. We had these big ass parties, excuse my language. Hopefully I'm allowed to cuss.
Not at all.
We used to have these really big parties, man, and everyone would be over and there'd be drinking. And I remember like cans of narcotic pills, and my uncle would just be passing them out like candy. And I fully take responsibility for my addiction, but it was promoted to me at a very young age. I learned how to self-medicate with drugs and alcohol. And again, that was like a source of bonding for me. So I started getting, probably in my early teen years, a little more interested in some more grown-up drugs. And, you might not know this, but, I was homeless by the time I was a teenager. So I dropped out of school for the first time in the 8th grade. I tried to go back every year, but, being a homeless teenager and at that point, heavily using drugs, was nearly impossible. So I stayed on friends' couches, friends of my mom's or friends of my dad. And at that point, my mom was having her journey. And so I was homeless for most of my teen years. And when I was 17, I got pregnant with my daughter. And by that time, I had already developed a pretty strong relationship with alcohol and cocaine. And by the time I was 17, I got pregnant with my daughter. I did stop while I was pregnant with her, but after I had my daughter, they prescribed me opiates. And then, I started kind of like drinking again on the weekends. And, I was functional for a lot of years. I had to be very resourceful, right? Like I learned at a young age, like it was up to me. If I wanted something done, if I needed something, I had to do it myself. So, I had a really good work ethic, even though I was an addict. So I was able to get, a pretty good job and able to get an apartment on my own by the time I was, 19. And so I had this baby and here I am, like trying to navigate life. And, eventually, my addiction took over and I began with the prescription pills. And I did that for a lot of years, actually, until it's like, I was pretty functional until I wasn't. And, and then I wasn't. And my addiction got really, really bad. And I was homeless. I was disconnected from my daughter. All the things that we do when we're using. I got really, really sick. I developed a heart condition because of my using, and my body was really, really run down. And I had very little hope, it's crazy to look back on like the last year, because I'll tell you this, and this is because I know there are people out here that can relate. from the time I was 19 until I got clean in my 30s, I went to treatment over a dozen times. I tried to quit so many times. I had that desire to stop using, and it wasn't enough to keep me clean.
Mhm.
I didn't make the changes, but also like your environment is so important. Like every time I
Yeah.
would, attempt to get clean, I'm going back to the same environment. You can't get well in an environment that you became sick in. So,
Mm.
um, so my spiritual awakening was living in a hotel in Detroit, homeless, disconnected from my daughter. I didn't speak to anyone by that point, no friends, no family. The only person I saw was the dealer. And
Yeah, that isolation, yeah.
oh, the isolation, man. That isolation, the silence was deafening,
Mm.
in
Mm.
the last parts of my using. And I just, I remember going over to a Wendy's next door, and I was run down, and I was physically, probably about 90 pounds.
Mm. Mm.
It was obvious that I was an addict.
Yeah.
There was something going on, and
Yeah.
the workers were really rude to me, and said some really, hurtful things to me, and
Mm.
it was like I was conscious enough to understand what was happening, but also still so far gone. And I walked outside, and this woman came out to me, and she said, "God told me to tell you that He loves you, and it's going to be okay." And now
Mm.
I'm not a religious person, but like in that moment, I didn't even feel worthy of
Right.
God's love.
Mm. Mm.
I bawled my eyes out, and I just sat there on the curb of the Wendy's, and I just cried and cried and cried. And I tried to go back to using, and there's a point when the drugs stop doing what they're intended, what we intend for them to do, which is to make us not feel the way that we naturally feel, right?
Mm.
It stopped working. It stopped working. It wasn't doing what it was intended to do. And it was actually making me sick. And I remember having this like epiphany, this moment. Like I knew there was a way. I didn't know how, but I knew there was a way. And I called 911, and they came and got me. And I went to the hospital, and you guys, like, I had no idea what life looked like for me. I had no idea if I was going to even live. And the hospital didn't know. My body was shutting down, and they're pumping me with antibiotics. And I slowly but surely started to connect with a friend of mine who had been in recovery, and my brother who led the path for me. He was sober a couple years, and I started to create a little bit of an opening for me, and I started to get a little more hope. And I was still petrified, man. Like I was still faced with that, that pull, man. The pull of addiction is so strong. And I just didn't, man, I didn't know how it was going to work, but I just surrendered. I surrendered. I surrendered every single day, man. I just woke up and surrendered. And I don't even know back then really what that looked like. But like in hindsight, I'm able to realize that I just finally, I had gave up. And yeah, man, like I inched my way back to health. I went to my brother's house. I stayed on the couch. My fevers were still through the roof. He was petrified, like he didn't know day to day, was his sister going to die on his couch? I mean,
Mm.
it was pretty intense. It always makes me emotional to talk about those
Yeah,
moments because it
I
feels
get it.
so far like from where I am today,
I
but
know.
it makes me so proud of her.
Yes. I get it, Melissa. Thank you for walking through this again because I know it's emotional. It's the same for me when I tell my story. So we love you. You're
Yeah,
doing awesome.
thank you. Thank you. But yeah, it's funny because it's like the way that I tell my story is a lot different than I told it in the beginning.
Yeah.
I I really I was so full of gratitude, you guys, and I still am. Like I gotta be honest, like, I think I was shocked that I was still alive. I really was. I would wake up every day. I went to an outpatient treatment program. That was something that saved me. That was really important for my journey. It's not for everybody. It was something that I needed. But I remember just like waking up every day and seeing the sunshine and just being so grateful to be alive and so grateful to have another chance. And I just kept building on that. And I don't know, man, like you come in here and you feel so hopeless, and people do love you. They love you exactly where you're at. And through that, you're able to find a glimmer of hope that, that you can learn to love yourself. And I did. And I just kept building on that and building on that. And yeah, man, like my first apartment, I got my first apartment, and then, got my first job. And
yeah, and then it just grows from there. And if I may, not to interrupt you, Melissa, but I think it's a good point for me to maybe interject and say this, that, and I always do this every show, kind of sort of put a disclaimer out there that this podcast is not affiliated with any 12-step program, whether it's AA, NA, or as I jokingly say, fucking A. I'll also say that I'm a 12-step guy. I'm, and I can damn sure talk about it. I ain't trying to represent or break no traditions for people who are in the program. You know what I'm talking about and all that other stuff. And I know it's the same for you, Melissa, but we also get a lot of viewers and listeners who aren't familiar with 12-step programs. And that's a lot of who we try to reach with this podcast sometimes, is people who may be still struggling, aren't familiar with the recovery community, who are looking for answers like I was when I was trying to kick opiates, man. I got a long history with addiction, but I never fucked with opiates when I was younger. I was a pot smoker, a drinker, a cokehead back in the days. I still feel so naive and so stupid. I hate saying it that way, but it's true that I got caught up in that shit. I should have known better, is how I still think to myself. When I started taking that shit, when I broke my ankle and I got sick, I started taking the pills, and I'm not blaming it on doctors, surgeons. They were just doing what they do, but I should have known better with my history of addiction to start taking that shit. And I did. And as I've told my story on here, and as you know, Melissa, it worked. And man, did it work good. And I got hooked, and it worked until it didn't anymore, as you said. And getting off of that shit was the worst thing I've ever been through in my life. And so anyway, where I was going with that is, as I mentioned, when, we first started talking with you tonight, is we met at a Narcotics Anonymous event, a 12-step event. And so as you were telling your story, you kind of alluded to, once you started to get clean, you said, and then you get in here and people love you. And so I thought, I need to interject and just put that disclaimer out there so that you feel hopefully as open as I do, talking about, your involvement with any 12-step group, because it's been so crucial. Because, and I'll say this, and then I'll stop talking for a second, Melissa, but I say on this podcast a lot that for me, I have my program and I have my recovery. Now, for me, I'm an NA guy. I can go to AA, whatever. It's all the same 12 steps to me, and I adapt. I respect AA's singleness of purpose, and I know the history and all that other stuff. It's just as the old saying goes, get in where you fit in. I fit in best in NA, and that's my history. I love it there. I can relate there more. That's my program. when I talk about my recovery, for me, it includes a lot of things other than just 12-step meetings, whether
Mhm.
it's NAA, whatever. It involves things I know that are important to you, like meditation, which I learned was a good idea to do by attending 12-step meetings. I go to the gym on the regular. I'm in the best physical shape I've been in since I was a kid. I go to yoga. So you get the idea. I do a lot of other stuff for my recovery other than just my 12-step program. So in any case, I mean to go on and on about it, but you kind of alluded to, you get in here and people love you till, as we say, you learn to love yourself again. Was that the case for you as well?
Oh yeah, yeah, no, and I think I'm so used to speaking
Yeah, yeah.
in the program. So yeah, let me just say too, I think it's important to note that there are different paths to recovery, and
Mm,
not everybody comes through a 12-step program, and that's okay. Um,
right.
it worked for me because the reason why it worked for me and the reason why it's so near and dear to my heart is because there is something so therapeutic about being in a room of people who are also recovering. That doesn't have to be NA or AA.
Mhm.
There's communities all over, such as even just this podcast, being a part of this podcast. So yeah, I think that's important. But for that is a part of my story.
Yeah.
And I'm grateful that that was a part of my story, because through that process, I was able to discover all of these different areas of my life that, I think are really, really important to address in order for me to really thrive in recovery, which is mind, body, and spirit. It's all connected. For me, I think you have to, we come in, however you are introduced to recovery, the idea of recovery or an abstinence or whatever it is for you. I think we identify with addiction, right? That's our
Mhm.
problem.
Yep.
But the more work that I have done, the more layers that I have peeled, for me personally, it was never really about the drugs. It was about the untreated trauma. It was about
Yeah.
not belonging. It was about not having safety. Not it was about untreated mental health issues. Like there for me um, were a lot of other things that I had to address outside of like attending 12-step meetings that were imperative in order for me to thrive. And that's honestly what I shout from the rooftops, because I see a lot of times there's a gap, right? Like,
Mm.
you know, and this is nothing against the 12-step programs. I love the 12-step programs. But for me personally is I spent so much time talking about what I was powerless over, right?
Mm.
And that's impounded in you. If you're not familiar with the 12-step program, that is the first step. We admit that we are powerless, and that is really, really important. It's imperative
Yeah.
that you admit that powerlessness. But like, what do I have power over?
Yeah.
You know,
Mhm.
what do I have power over? And finding out what that is and what's important about that for me has been a huge, huge part of my journey. Like you said,
I'm
like,
Yeah, I'm sorry to interrupt, but I love the way you're describing it, because I've often said too that by admitting my powerlessness, I therefore became empowered
yeah,
because,
a hundred
I
percent.
had to come to an understanding that, as I know you understand, and certainly people in recovery do, once I see, the first step was real easy for me. For people in 12-step programs, I kind of, being honest, never quite understood how people struggle with the first step, because for me, and the way it was explained to me, is once I put that shit in my body, whatever it may be, whatever mind or mood altering substance you want to pick, drinking, smoking weed, taking pills, coke, whatever the fuck, doesn't matter. Once I put it in my body, all bets are off.
100%.
There's no telling when and where I will stop. And unfortunately for me, I say unfortunately, I think this is the case for most people. I crossed that line where I go till the wheels fall off. Wasn't always that way. Didn't start off that way. For most people I've met in recovery programs, it all starts off fun and games, have a good time, social, you grow up around it, whatever the fuck, you know what I mean? But for some of us who truly are real ones, we cross that line where there's no turning back. Once you put it in your body, you truly become powerless over it. It has control over you. And then the second part of that first step, without going, too deep into it, is, and admitted my life had become unmanageable. My life was a fucking mess when I came. I'm still cleaning up some of the wreckage of the past, and that's for me all 3 times, because it's my 3rd time around, y'all. This ain't my first rodeo with living clean and sober, and I use that phrase on here a lot, by the way, Melissa, clean and sober. And for some of our NA or, 12-step purists, it's like, they have this clarity statement now, well, when we use mixed language, it is, insinuates there's 2 separate sicknesses. Whatever the fuck. I don't get caught up in all that political bullshit, especially for a lot of our younger viewers and listeners. They use that word sober as all encompassing for living clean and sober, because it's true. Alcohol is a drug. I get it, y'all. Believe me, I get it. Okay. I also try to use liberal language when it comes to that stuff so that we're not alienating anybody. Did I say that right? That's hard to say. Alienating,
Yeah.
but you get the idea. So going back to the first step, that one has always been pretty easy for me. But, back to your point on it, Melissa, is by admitting my powerlessness over any minor mood altering substance I might put in my body. Once I get clean and get it out of my body, I therefore become empowered over it because I'm not fucking using it. As long as I don't put it in my body, I got it at bay. But once I put it in my body, man, I'm powerless, So I like the way you said that, I guess, is the way I'm, describing it.
Yes. Taking our power back.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So in any case, I thought it was important to talk about the 12-step programs a little bit, because, and I like what you said, that, there's many paths to recovery. And some of my, 12-step purists, I call them, the NA gurus or whatever, they don't always like it when I say this, but I don't give a fuck. It is what it is. NA, AA, fucking A, do not have a monopoly on how to get, stay, and live clean. Like I said, hey, I'm a 12-step guy. I'm an NA guy, and I don't think that I would be clean right now without it, to be perfectly honest with you. I'll also say it ain't for everybody. So if you're somebody watching or listening to this podcast that's struggling, maybe looking for a way out, maybe you've even dabbled in some 12-step meetings, whether it be in person or maybe even online in Zoom meetings, and like, that ain't for me, man. I get it. No worries. As Melissa said, that is not the only way to recovery. There's things out there now, and Melissa, you and I and Steve and Shivang talked about it when you were on the podcast last time. There's a group out there called Dharma Recovery. And there's other things like what you're doing with your life coaching, and like you mentioned, this podcast. Some people find a spiritual path, whatever it is, but here's what I'll say, and then I'd like to get your take on this too, Melissa. There's a saying that I've heard for years around the program: any old asshole can get clean, go into fucking detox, go into treatment, get in your sister's basement or on your brother's couch, like you said, anybody can get clean if they really want to. But how you gonna stay clean? That's, for me, where the 12-step meetings have come in and been so important to me, because I have built a network of friends that it would do anything for me, honest to God. And I know you know what I'm talking about, Melissa. I mean, people who, if I was struggling and on the fence about going to get loaded, and I called them at 3 o'clock in the morning, they'd take my call. And they'd probably say, God damn, Glenn, it's 3 a.m. What the hell? And if I said, man, I'm struggling, I'm thinking about using, they'd say, all right, man, let's talk, or where you at? I'll meet you, or whatever. And that type of network is just so important to me. And so I thought it was real important to talk a little bit about that, because I just think that support system is very important. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and like I said, I mean, that is definitely something that really, really, really it changed the way that I experienced myself. It changed the way I experienced life, because for me, like kind of experiencing some of the things that I experienced and feeling so unlovable, like just like having all that love around me all the time, just it made me, it's literally lit the light that I have in me today. But yeah, I mean, I would say this, if the meetings aren't your thing, fine. If you don't have a community, let's say you're super introverted, you don't want to, fine. Okay. Find something that brings you joy. Figure out your why. Figure out why not, number one, right? Like that goes back to the first step. Why can't I use drugs anymore? Like why, what is it doing to me? Right. And that's, so figuring out why not, and then why do I stay, like, what is my why? What is my why? My why is my daughter. My why is I want to break generational patterns that have been existing in my family for generation after generation. My why is that there are, in my opinion, hundreds of thousands of women out there that need me, that are going to hear my story, and it might change the way they see things. I have a responsibility to them to stay clean and sober. And I don't get into like the politics of NA and A. I do both programs. I've done Smart Recovery. I've done it all.
Smart.
There's not one path to recovery, but whatever you're going to do, find a way to experience joy, you guys. For me, it's going back to what I like to do as a kid. It's re-experiencing that kind of thing as often as possible. I am a very serious, intellectual, intelligent woman, but I know how to have fun. And that is something that has been imperative for me in recovery. Find something that brings you joy. And yeah.
Well, I just love it, Melissa. And I got to tell you, man, you just made me think of something. I got to say it again. Thank you so much for agreeing to do this podcast, because something I wanted to talk with you about a little bit is this whole fucking stigma out there, because it's still out there. And, for people like you and I who, we've been around recovery, which, by the way, we should probably, say that we haven't even mentioned it yet. You've been clean for a long time now, haven't you?
Yeah.
So,
7 years, 7.5 years.
Wow, that is amazing. And by the way, I'm sorry to get off track here. We want to say hi to Lena Rose, who's in the chat room. And V says yes again. So thank you, V. So yeah, and shout out again to everybody watching and listening. I see we got a whole bunch of people on board tonight. So in any case, though, what you were saying, Melissa, you talked a little bit earlier when you were telling your story about how you have been in treatment, drug rehab, like myself. I've been in inpatient 3 times, outpatient treatment a few times, where I did exactly what you talked about, started addressing some of those deeper issues. Why on earth did I continue to use, once the good times were over and the social and, all that kind of stuff? continue to use when I knew this was causing problems in my life, and started to address some of that, trauma from, I mean, even now, to be honest, man, every now and then, Melissa, I'll be at a meeting and some of the shit that comes out of my mouth, I'll be driving home thinking, damn, I thought I put that to bed years ago. I can't believe I brought that up and talked about it. And it makes me think to myself, I guess maybe I still do have some unresolved issues that I've just learned to stuff and stuff and stuff. And sometimes just talking about it at a meeting is healing for me. Wouldn't you agree? Is that part of your process too?
100%, man. Everything. I don't mean to get too spiritual, but energy stays in the body until we move it. Words are energy, and emotions are energy in motion. So when we physically and vocally speak what's going on inside of us, we are literally releasing. That is a part of the therapeutic value. Like, I'm really comfortable being by myself, and I have other outlets too outside of 12-step meetings, that, ways that I work on myself and connect with other humans. But there is something unmatched about being able to just share openly and freely, and also about, helping someone else, like getting outside of yourself. But yeah, man, like the experience of just speaking it, and just like you said, like things come up that you weren't even aware. But in my experience, like life always reveals to you exactly what you're ready for when you're ready for it. And you just kind of got to go with the flow. Like sometimes I don't understand things that come up. Why am I feeling this way? I thought this was something that I had processed, and I have to lean in and yeah, just experience.
Absolutely. Well, once again, though, I really, really appreciate you coming on the podcast and being so open with your story and all, because it is true, and sometimes that's where I started to go earlier. I think sometimes, folks like you and I and others who have been around the, 12-step programs or just living clean for a long time like we have, we sometimes maybe forget a little bit how much of a challenge it is for someone brand new to trying to get clean to come out, if you will. That's part of the reason for this podcast. Dare me to come out. Well, hey, if you're struggling right now, I dare you. You can do it. Fuck the stigma, man. Oh God, what are people gonna think? I remember first time I went into rehab, I'll never forget, Melissa, thinking to myself, oh my God, these people are going to find out I'm crazy and they're going to lock me up and throw away the key. And I literally felt that way, And so the thing of it is, I do think in our society, we've come a long way in understanding that addiction is a sickness. And, in the 12-step programs, that word disease is used. And technically it is considered a disease by the American Medical Association or whatever the hell it is. But for some of us, myself included, that word disease always kind of fucked with me, like, oh God, it's a disease. I don't want to get any on me, and I just always kind of thought of it as like, something like cancer, diabetes. But it's weird how some of us feel that way. For me, how I've gotten past it is I can't deny it's a fucking sickness. It is absolutely a sickness. It's physical, deteriorates our physical health, as you talked about, even in part of your story, Melissa. It certainly was for me. It absolutely affects our mental health because we make horrible choices when we're using that shit. And on a spiritual level, we have no peace. So yeah, for me, man, that's one of the ways I get past that whole disease word. If that's something bothering you, if you're new to this, journey of trying to get and live clean, I think of it as a sickness. I do believe it's a disease, but it just makes it easier for me to process when I use that word sickness in its place. But anyway, where I was getting a little off track there, but the point I was making is if you're somebody new to our podcast, you're watching or listening for the first time and you're trying to get to the other side, Don't worry about what other people are going to think. What do you care? We're talking about your life here. And what most people, myself included, have experienced is once you legit and sincerely are trying to help yourself, people will bend over backwards and are more understanding than you could possibly imagine to help you. Wouldn't you agree, Melissa, that that's an accurate statement?
100%, 100%. The universe, your God, whatever that looks like for you, will open those doors. And yeah, I never could have imagined like the love and support that I have today and the opportunities that I have been given just by making that decision. And yeah, like, the word, I don't like, even when I go to a meeting now, I don't identify as an addict. For me, I am an addict. I know that. But I start by saying, hi, my name is Melissa. I'm in recovery. And I just started doing that because I want to identify
Right.
with a person being in recovery. And,
Right.
if you're caught up about the word dis-ease, then look at it this way. There's two parts to that word, dis-ease. So it's the
Yeah.
opposite of being at ease. If looking at it that from that perspective offers you, any peace. So yeah, man, if you're struggling and you don't know where to start, just take the first step. That's it. I couldn't picture the next day. I did it 1 minute at a time, one step at a time. And then eventually I was able to do it one day at a time. But you just take the first step, even though you don't know what's coming next. And
Yeah.
it works out.
Yeah, and the hardest part for some people is getting through that physical withdrawal, and I get it, especially like in NA and different programs. It's considered a drug is a drug is a drug, and they're all just a symptom of the sickness. I'll also say, at least for me, oh, there's a difference, man. It was a hell of a lot different kicking opiates than it was kicking coke or kicking the booze or kicking smoking weed or whatever the fuck. Getting off them opiates, it was the worst thing I've ever been through in my life. And I say this a lot on the podcast. I don't give a shit. I had cancer. Thank God, knock on wood, I've been cancer free for over 6 years. I went through 6 months of chemo. Thank God I didn't have to do radiation, but I went through 6 months of chemo. For me, maybe not for everybody, but for me, going through the opiate withdrawals was worse than that.
Yeah.
Now, I get it. It's different for different people. Keeping in mind, not to say my bottom was any worse than anybody else's. I was on that shit for 9 fucking years, man. And at the end, I was snorting heroin. It started off, with Norcos prescribed when I broke my ankle. And before I knew it, man, I went through them all, from Norcos to Perks or Bikes, whatever you want to call them, to Oxys, to Demerol, Dilaudid, and at the end, snorting heroin because I couldn't get the pills and I'd get dope sick. And of course, the plug would be like, hey, Glenn, man, the good goods coming in tomorrow or the next day, but I got this to hold you over, and never in a million years did I think that a guy like you said, Melissa, a guy like me, I'm a pretty smart guy when I got my head on straight. I'm an educated man. You would never have people in my life. I'm sure from my professional life and business world probably freaked the fuck out like, oh my God, Glenn was fucking snorting heroin, It's a miracle I'm not fucking dead with all the fentanyl and everything else out there now. But that's how bad that shit had me. You know what I mean? And so, anyway, the point I was getting at is if you are someone new watching this podcast, and I know we get them every single week because we hear from them from all over, not just in the US, but other countries that come across this podcast looking for information on how to kick, just like I was when I was trying to get clean. Man, I was Googling shit, how to kick opiates, looking on YouTube for videos, how to get through opiate withdrawals, and I'd come across stuff. The hardest part for me was getting through those physical withdrawals. I get it, y'all. The cold sweats, the restless leg and arm syndrome, feeling like you got that hamster on a wheel in your chest running on that, and like you're crawling out of your skin, the insomnia, you can't eat, it's coming out of both ends the whole night. It was horrible, man. It fucking sucked. Once I got through that, and if I can do it, you can do it, believe me. And with the love and support of someone, especially, see, that's another big thing, Melissa, for me, and I think for other people too, is being able to, first of all, admit that we need help, and then being willing to accept help from others who are offering it. And then, like I was saying, once you get through those physical withdrawals, then it's about working on some of the other stuff like we were talking about. Wouldn't you agree? Yeah, I mean to get into that long war story, but man, when I get talking about it, it's like sometimes I just get fired up talking about it, you know?
Yeah. 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 100%. Is you start, coming in here and, you take the first step, just surrender that you can't do it anymore, and then be willing to, be helped. And then, yeah, like you said, just, eventually you can start to peel back the layers and work through some of the deeper stuff. But yeah, I mean, in the beginning, it really is simple. It's simple, not easy, and I do want to say too, the only way we end the stigma is by, more of us stepping up and saying like, hey, I have this problem. I need help. So, and I get it, I have been on, both sides, there was a point in my life, before my addiction got out of control, like I would look at, heroin addicts and say, there's no way I would ever do that. You would never catch me doing that. And, I was judgy. I had those like images of what an addict looked like, and, they were hopeless and they were XYZ. And so, I mean, I think, even now people hear my story and they're shocked because, it doesn't fit, their idea of what an addict looks like.
Yeah, so I get it. I
I
totally get it.
Yeah, I mean, and that's what, we end the stigma and we make it safe. Do you know how many people have came to me for help with addiction and gambling, eating addictions,
Right.
family members that are struggling? Hey, like so and so. I mean, it is, most people have been touched by addiction in some way, shape, or form, whether it was with themselves or someone in their family. So there's nothing to be ashamed of.
Well, you know what, Melissa? Thank you for saying that. And I got to touch on this because you mentioned it a little bit earlier. Another thing about living clean, once you get through the hell of the withdrawals and all that other stuff, that helps me to stay clean is exactly what you mentioned earlier. And something we commonly talk about around the 12-step programs is you got to give it away to keep it. And one of the true joys of living clean that you just talked about is when others come and ask you for input, confide in you, ask you for direction, whether it's on the DL initially or openly. But man, does that make you feel good as a recovering person? Like, wow, this person actually respects my opinion, my input. Because for some of us, man, when we come in, we feel about that big because we know we fucked up so bad. And Melissa, I'll say this, and I know you won't mind me saying this, and I won't mention any names or anything, but you know, uh, as recent as this past week, I guess it's been about a week, you actually had contacted me about a 12-step call and asked me to reach out to a person that I did. And God, man, we ended up spending like over a half hour on the phone. And then afterwards, he got back to me thanking me for spending time talking with him. And so I mean, it's just like you said, that this community, once you get involved in it and you're living clean, it's just so amazing how there's almost like that ripple effect of how we help each other. Because at the end of the day, let's just boil it down to what I often say: the least common denominator is we're all helping to try save each other's lives. This is about saving lives,
100%.
especially now with all this fentanyl and everything else out there. And by the way, if I may, I want to send a quick shout out to Eric, who is in our chat room tonight. And I'm so glad Eric is with us on the show, Melissa. And I know he won't mind me sharing this because we've said it before. Eric found the Dare Me podcast, I think it was 3 weeks ago. And he has shared openly with us that he's still struggling. So, welcome to the Dare Me podcast again, Eric. We're glad that you jumped back on with us again. And hopefully, something we're talking about with you tonight, bro, is going to be helpful to you. And we want you to keep us posted on your journey, because Eric is trying to get off opiates, Melissa, and start, living clean like we are. And hopefully we can be an inspiration to him too. So yes, thank you, Melissa, for mentioning that a huge part of living clean is helping others. And the weird irony is it helps the others, but it helps us to stay clean and have peace too. Wouldn't you agree?
Oh, 100%. Yeah, I was thinking about that today. Like, people, helping our fellow addicts is like what honestly feeds me and fuels me. And yeah, like, Eric, man, you're still, you're here and you're taking the first step. And I always tell people, like, I've had, I've sponsored women in the program that have relapsed and came back, or, spoken to them while they were using. And it's like, I never try to force anyone, because I know that there will eventually come a point where you're done, man, where you make the decision that enough is enough. And until then, you just keep showing up. You're taking the first step, and there's something to be said about that. And it's possible for you. I know it's a long journey, man, but you can get through it. If I can do it, if Uncle Glenn can do it, anyone can do it, man. It's possible.
Say that. And Natalie just chimed in the chat room too, Eric. She said, keep coming back, Eric. And yes, thank you, Natalie, for sharing that message with our boy, Eric. And Eric just typed in too. He says, glad to be here. And yes, very helpful. I'm still trying. I'm just terrified of being sick. Wish I could be happy like all you guys. And you know what? I'm glad you shared that, Eric, because that certainly was the case for me. And I think for most people trying to get through not just an opiate withdrawal, but really any kind of withdrawal. And we should say for some types of withdrawals, that's why I say some drugs are different. It's very dangerous to go through withdrawals without maybe having some type of medical supervision. Like if you're hooked on the booze, y'all, you really need to be under medical supervision. You can go into seizures and that whole kind of thing. So, but that being terrified, Eric, that's not uncommon. That's very common. It's not unusual at all. Man, you get this horrible anxiety because you know that when you go into full-blown withdrawals, it's coming. Because most people, when they get clean off of opiates, it ain't their first time being dope sick. You know what I mean? Because you run out, you just run out of shit, or you can't get it or whatever. So you've struggled through withdrawals before. So when you finally decide to jump off, hopefully for good, and get clean, what's fucking coming. And you get terrified, you get anxiety. So yeah, Eric, thank you for sharing that, bro. And don't feel alone. And believe it or not, although you may be still struggling, you're already helping other people. Because, bro, we could have somebody else on this podcast watching right now who's on the DL just watching and listening, who can relate to exactly what you just shared. So it just goes back to what Melissa and I were just talking about, man. That's how part of how we stay clean is by sharing the message. We give it away to keep it, to inspire other people. And you are inspiring others right now, whether you know it or not. Fuck, you're inspiring me by reminding me I don't want to fucking go back to that shit, you know? And so, anyway, bro, here's another message from Eric, Melissa. He says, hopefully one day. And yes, of course I'll be. So, yes. And then Natalie, we got an active chat room tonight. Yo, lots of people watching and listening to the podcast. We're going to have you back on more often, Melissa. We got more viewers and listeners than we've had in a long time. But anyway, so yeah, any other words of input for our friend Eric tonight, Melissa?
Oh, if I could say one thing, he talked about being terrified of being sick, and the one thing that we always talk about in 12-step meetings is you either suffer the pain of withdrawal or you suffer the pain of using. And so at least with getting clean, there's light at the end of the tunnel. Like with using that there's no possible way of having a positive outcome, and you can prolong it as long as you want, but it is inevitable. However, getting to the other side is amazing, and you can have that happiness too. I will literally shout it from the rooftops. Recovery is better than any high I've ever had in my life. If you've ever been around me, you know I have a very high energy. I love being clean, and there's not one single drug or drink that I have ever experienced that has given me the feelings that I'm able to have 100% clean and sober. And you can and will have that too. So until you're ready, I'm going to keep praying, but just remember that. And you have a choice.
Yeah. Well, Melissa, thank you for reminding me too. I appreciate that because, man, I hadn't heard that in a while. And it does say that in the NA literature. You can go through the pain of withdrawals or the pain of using. And once you get them through them withdrawals, if you don't go back to using, you just got to go through that shit one time, man, one fucking time. But when you go through the pain of using, it's over and over and over and over and over again until you feel like fucking dying, you know. And when it comes to getting through the pain of those withdrawals, man, like Melissa said, if she can do it, if I can do it, you can do it, you know? And so anyway, Eric says, appreciate you guys. So Melissa, again, thanks for sharing that message with our friend Eric. And I just got to say this, Melissa, I'm going to kind of shift gears a little bit. You said that, you're a high energy person. And oh man, you just reminded me of something I talk a lot about on this podcast is, we talk about meetings and recovery and treatment centers and outpatient, all this other stuff. I'll also say once we get clean and we're living clean, we do a lot of cool stuff, man. We have a lot of cool things going on in the recovery community. And that just kind of takes me back to, kind of going full circle when we first started talking tonight, Melissa, how I met you. We were at a NA World Convention where thousands of people, tens of thousands of people, in some cases at these world conventions from all over not just the United States, but literally around the world come together to celebrate being clean and living in recovery. And man, oh man, there's just so much other stuff going on other than just conventions. In every city, every state, every town, there's always dances, there's picnics, there's campouts, there's, what we call the meeting after the meeting. People always going out to eat in the program, man. I have a friend, he used to say, damn, man, I got clean and I was staying up at night. I couldn't sleep. And I thought it was because all the shit on my mind. He goes, come to find out it was because all that coffee I was drinking at the meetings. He said I had to quit drinking coffee. But the point I'm making is, yeah, what you said, Melissa, I've become a very high energy person too. Obviously, I'm a high strung person to begin with. I often say you have type A personalities, type B personalities. I'm like a type AAA. I'm like the Energizer Bunny. I just keep going and going and going. But I tried to find them before the podcast today. There's so many goddamn photos in my phone, Melissa, but I have pictures of you. And I mentioned you're friends with a couple of my family members, at this dance where we were all at. And I'll find them and send them to you at some point. But the point I'm making is, yeah, we are high energy once we get clean and start living that clean lifestyle. We go and have fun at dances and different things like that. So I appreciate you mentioning that, because you reminded me that, we do have fun in living clean and recovery, because I think for some people who are still stuck in that whole using thing, like I was saying earlier, I think sometimes for people like you and I who've been clean for so long, we forget people who are still using will be thinking, God damn, man, I ain't gonna be able to have no fun no more once I quit using. And it's like, man, I have more fun now than I think I did when I was using, wouldn't you agree?
Oh, 100%. Yeah. I wasn't
Yeah.
having fun when I was using. I was numbing out. I was trying to escape. And today I experience a full range of emotions and I embrace them all, even the ones that are uncomfortable. Um, yeah, man, my capacity to experience joy and excitement and contentment and peace is multiple.
Yeah. Well, you know what? I'd like to shift gears again, Melissa, because, and thank you so much, by the way, for telling your story and your journey through addiction and recovery and getting clean. And now I'd like to talk a little bit more about this journey you're on. And pardon me when I bring this photo up if it covers your face. Like I mentioned earlier, if you're somebody just joining us or joined late, we unfortunately don't have our co host and producer, Dean Baker, with us tonight. Shout out, Dean, if you're watching. I hope you think I'm doing a good job producing tonight. Dean broke his leg in a freak motorcycle accident. He's okay, but he had to go into surgery this morning. He's out of surgery and he's recovering now. But Dean wasn't able to join us on the show tonight. And oh my God, do you realize how much work one of your, part of your team does when they're not there? And so I kind of been juggling, not just talking with Melissa tonight, but juggling some of the behind the scenes production stuff with our slides and videos and stuff like that. So anyway, I thought I'd mention that because I'm going to bring up a couple slides now, Melissa, and apologies in advance if I end up covering our face. Let's see if I can get us over on the side and bring that up. Okay, cool. We can still see ourselves. So I'd like to shift gears a little bit and talk about this part of your journey. And thank you again for telling your story. And now that you've been living this life of being clean and having peace in your life, you have become a certified life and health coach. Talk to us about this, because I think this is so awesome. I just love this. So what got you started on this journey, and where are you at with it now?
Oh man, a big part of my journey has been uh, figuring out what works best for my body. So nutrition is something that I'm really, really passionate about. I think it plays a huge role in mental health and how we feel physically. I do not believe, like I said, I believe in treating the body and the mind and the spirit. So it has to come from a holistic approach. So, me pursuing health and life coaching was an opportunity for me to build a program that includes addressing all of those areas. And so I became passionate about, nutrition probably in the first year that I got clean, because for me, we didn't have like fruits and vegetables or anything really fresh growing up. We ate a lot of processed food and sodas and chips and things like that. And so that's the nutrition aspect. But, I really want to provide a safe space for women, particularly who've overcome addiction and trauma, to guide them towards a lifelong journey of self-love, to change the way that they feel about themselves, the way that they see themselves, to embrace healing and transformation. And again, like I said, I believe that has to happen from a holistic approach, mind, body, and spirit. And so that is what empowered life coaching is all about. And yeah, I have some really, really exciting stuff in the making. Yeah, I have found the thing that lights a fire under my ass, and it's guiding women through the process. Like throughout my journey, I've learned all of these healing modalities, whether it was, addressing nutrition or my daily habits or the way that I see myself, my beliefs and identity. And, I think personally in my experience that the best mentors and leaders that I have had are people who have been through that journey themselves. So who better to walk women through this process than somebody who's been there?
Yes. I'd like to clarify, if I may, because I remember when we had you on the podcast last time, I asked you about this, and I just want to clarify for any of our viewers or listeners that may be watching that with your life coaching, that you're doing, this is geared toward any women once they've gotten clean. You're not necessarily working with people to help get them clean. I mean, if they inquire, you can certainly kind of sort of point them in the right direction, just like what we were talking about, carrying the message and try to inspire people to go do what they need to do to get clean, whether it's going to treatment or detox or whatever else. That's not what your life coaching is. It's about when people get clean and are processing some of their stuff that you can then help them with. Is that a good way to describe it?
Yeah. I mean, so yeah, my life coaching business is my target is really women who have overcome addiction and trauma. And once they get here, I think a lot of times we realize that we're not experiencing the life that we want to be experiencing, right? We kind of feel stuck in our old habits and patterns. We maybe have a distorted image of ourselves. Maybe we have a really hard time loving ourselves. We've been wanting to make changes in our nutrition we want to do XYZ, and there's this space in between, right? We're here and we want to get here. And what my life coaching does is lovingly guide you through that process to get you from here to here. And so I would never turn away somebody that was inquiring about my coaching that was, say, new to recovery. But yeah, I think, that my vision is really for women once they get here to help them get to where they want to be and to fulfill their life's purpose and to really, truly, truly take back their power. Because again, I think we put a lot of emphasis on what we're powerless over, and I want to help women take their power back.
Right. And you know what? Couple quick things I want to mention, Melissa. By the way, excuse me. Sorry. You are a certified life and health coach, because I don't want people to think you're just, randomly decided one day to slap a shingle on the wall. Yeah, I think I'll be a life coach. You went through training and have certificates, which I saw actually posted on your social media. I used in one of the promo reels for this week's show. So talk to us a little bit about that, kind of qualify yourself, if you will. You went through training to do this, correct?
Oh yeah, absolutely. My training was, it took me about a year to complete training, but I received 2 certificates. So we had 2 different cohorts, one on health coaching and one on life coaching. So we learned all about nutrition, the way that the body works. And then, I did a whole cohort on life coaching. So I received my certifications in both health and life coaching, because again, I had the option to focus just on health or just on life, but it is my belief that you cannot address one without the other. So yes, I do have certifications in both health and life coaching. And I combine the framework that I learned in that program with my life experience. So
Right. Now, let me ask you this. This is the other question. So you mentioned, wanting to help women in recovery and women who've gone through trauma.
mhm.
So I'd just like to clarify for our viewers and listeners, what if someone didn't struggle with addiction and just kind of trying to process some, PTSD or some trauma? It's not a requirement that they be somebody in recovery to work with you. Is that correct?
No,
I mean, it may be
absolutely.
your preference, because like you said, you bring experience to the table from, recovery from addiction and all. However, we may have people who may be interested in some coaching who maybe just dealing with some trauma, I guess, is what I'm saying.
Yeah. And so yeah, I mean, so what I would suggest is, what I like to do is always start with like a discovery call, a total transformation call is what we call it. Um,
Mm,
and so if anybody was interested in learning a little bit more about what I offer in my coaching, you could always go to empoweredlifecoaching.com and look a little, read a little bit further about what I offer in my coaching. I always, there is some parallels with coaching and therapy, but I always make sure that I am clear about, the things that we address in life coaching. There definitely is processing, but I would never recommend that be a replacement for therapy. So if somebody is
right.
suffering from PTSD, I would always highly, highly, highly recommend that you get some professional help with therapy. But in my coaching, we're working more on creating healthy habits that support healing. We're working on creating an image of self that supports us, that feels good, that feels empowering. We're working on, regulating the body and regulating our emotions. So no, it is not a requirement. With coaching, you have to sort of find a niche, but that does not
Mm.
exclude anybody that would be interested in coaching. So yeah.
Well, I just thought it was, a good idea to maybe clarify that, and I appreciate you doing that. So let's talk a little bit, and I'm going to bring you over to the side and bring this slide up. Boy, I wish Dean was here. We miss you, Dean. Hope you're doing well. If you're still watching, bro. This slide right here. Now I know, Melissa, this was a past, thing that you did. And I love the headline you use here. Are you ready to transform your life from the inside out? And this was, I don't know, is workshop maybe the right word to use, seminar? Talk to us a little bit about this event that you hosted.
Yeah, so that was a 4-day workshop, a self-empowerment workshop that was held out in Ann Arbor, through another person. It's through a therapy clinic out in Ann Arbor. But yeah, the empowerment workshop was a series of activities and activities that were designed to help us learn a little bit more about our behaviors, our habits, and how we see ourselves and experience ourselves. So I will definitely be putting together more workshops out in Ann Arbor, and have some plans to host some a little bit closer to where I'm at in the Detroit area. But I see different topics in the community that relate to, people in our community. So this could vary from, self-love to nutrition to the physical aspects of addiction. And So yeah.
So let me go ahead and show this one. This is another one that we got. And by the way, I do want to talk about your contact information so people know how to reach you if they want to. And this is from the Instagram. So on Insta, it's Empower with Melissa, IMPOWER with Melissa. And I love this shot here. It says Empowered Living Retreat. And so, what I'm going to do right now, if you don't mind, Melissa, is I'm going to play a short video clip that we pulled from your social media about this little mini retreat you did. And then we want to talk to you about it. So, check this out, y'all.
I love you down to your bones, naked and afraid. They tell me that's when you know. I feel you taking me home, dusk until the dawn. You're where I wanna go.
So yeah, I mean, it's just that quick, y'all, but it gave me a pretty good idea and understanding what that was all about. And I was thinking to myself, damn, I wish it wasn't just for women. I think I'd like to go to that thing, especially, you had some really good looking snacks there at the end too. But anyway, I'm joking, but half serious. But it looks like just a really relaxed, laid back, cool kind of atmosphere. And I know the video went by quick, but I do like that one sign you had there. What was it? Like, hey, I've checked out for some spiritual maintenance, or however it said on that one sign. Talk to us a little bit about that event and what you do there.
Oh wow, that was my empowered living retreat launch. That was a soft launch that I did at my house to just offer it to some women that I am, really close to. But it gave me an opportunity to get very, very clear on what my vision is for empowered. And the retreats are all around healing, around community, healing mind, body, and spirit, about having a safe place to cultivate self-love, to encourage one another, to really, really get to know ourselves and feel safe and free to be ourselves. Nutrition, again, like I said, is a big part of my journey. And so empowered retreats are always going to have healthy, high vibrational foods. And that retreat was amazing. We really, really, really got to know each other on a very deep level. We bonded, we laughed, we cried, we ate nutritious, high vibrational food. And then at the end of the night, we took a cold plunge in the lake and cleansed, and just sort of had like a christening and an awakening. And I can say that I got some really, really good feedback from the attendees at that retreat, who said that they experienced some pretty big transformations, and that's what Empowered is all about.
Wow. How cool is that? I just love it. And so, hey, folks, we've been holding you hostage, Melissa, for almost 2 hours. And I just can't thank you enough for spending as much time as you did with us. We just got to have you back on the podcast again down the road, because I feel like we could talk for 2 more hours, and I meant what I said at the front end of this program. I am so proud. Oh man, I'm trying not to get filled up for a second here. I am so proud to call you my friend. I know you like to call me Uncle Glenn and all that, but I truly do think of you as my friend. And I'm so proud of what you're doing, and so happy for you, because hearing your story of what you went through, during active addiction, and how you were able to turn that all around to be doing what you're doing now and changing lives, as you just described. People at that little mini retreat you did said it was a transformative experience for them. God, for God's sake, having you on this podcast again today was transformative for me, because it's so inspirational and motivational. So thank you again for being on with us and sharing your message today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Oh God. And if I may, let's just go ahead and share a little bit more of your contact information. This is and sorry, I put you there we go. Shout out Dean, we miss you, bro. Anyway, this is on Facebook. Your people can find you on Facebook as Melissa Dawn, correct?
The handle is Empower with Melissa.
Okay.
Yep.
And
Both Instagram and Facebook.
hey, if you're watching, listening, and you want to follow Melissa, she regularly posts which I just love that you do this, Melissa, because yeah, I get it. You know, your message is focused toward the girls, which I think is awesome. You know, it's also very inspirational to me, and I'm sure others that follow you that are males, and you post these inspirational messages like this, and I love that you call it the golden nugget. Because for people who know me in the 12 step rooms, I talk about that a lot. How I was once told, Glenn, don't cheat yourself out of the message if my ego kicks in and starts judging others. Because I do that sometimes, Melissa. Like, oh God, I can't believe I got to sit here and listen to this guy or that girl or whatever. And I'm judging the messenger instead of listening to the message. And I had somebody tell me once, Glenn, quit judging the messenger and listen for the golden nugget. And you know what? When I do that, it really helps me. So I just love it that you call this the golden nugget. And here's an inspirational message that Melissa posted on her Facebook. And I'll just read it real quick. Stop waiting for someone else to show you the love you want and deserve, and start being intentional about how you love yourself. And you know what? That is so awesome, Melissa, because you know, how's that saying go? In fact, there was even a song, the greatest love of all is learning to love yourself. And, you know, for I think a lot of us in the recovery community, we have to learn to forgive ourselves. You know, there's that old saying that when we make that amends list, we ought to put ourselves at the top of the list, because sometimes we can be our own worst enemy. I remember my first sponsor, Chester, telling me, God damn, Glenn, you need to turn off that ass kicking machine, because I would beat myself up so much over stuff that I did. Even now, you know, I mentioned, God damn, I can't fucking believe I was snorting heroin. I still can't believe that I would do something so stupid like that. Because to me, it was stupid for me to do that. And I'm still in the process of forgiving myself. But the point I'm making is this is a beautiful message, Melissa, that, yeah, we have to learn to love ourselves again, you know. So thanks for posting that. I appreciate it. And then I thought we'd show this other golden nugget, which is great because, you know, this one here, Melissa, I thought I'd post this one because it made me think to myself, damn, maybe I'm doing better than I thought I was, because it says quality time. Take yourself out on a date. Write a letter to your inner child or your future self, which I think is great advice. And then this is where I was going with this. At the bottom, it says meditate. I do it regularly. Sing. I do it regularly. Dance. I do it not maybe regularly, but I do it. For God's sake, I posted a video on social media dancing with my dog, and then yoga, and I do it regularly. So, you know, some of the stuff that you're promoting, we do to have peace and happiness in our life, I'm doing. And by putting these little golden nuggets out there, it just reinforces to me that, you know, that's part of the reason I'm able to stay and live clean, because I work on that self-love and having some peace in my life. So anyway, with all that said, Melissa, before we let you go, is there anything you'd like to add? And then we'll cut you loose. It's been a couple hours and I just really appreciate you being on with us.
Oh man, no, I really, really, really want to thank you for having me here. And again, just congratulations on building this. I mean,
Yeah,
I'm so
great.
happy to hear so many people are tuning in. And I hope somebody was able to receive a message of hope. And if you're interested in learning a little bit more about my coaching, again, go to empoweredlifecoaching.com, and that'll take you to a page that'll give you a little more information. You can book a call if you're interested in learning more. But yes, guys, follow me on Instagram, follow me on Facebook. Let's be friends. And then that way we can stay connected and keep you posted and let you know when our next events are, whether it's online or in person. And I really, again, just appreciate you having me here. And I hope everyone has an amazing night.
Well, hey, if I may, Melissa, just real quick, one more thing I thought we should maybe talk about. And I meant to mention this earlier and I forgot, because you talked about, being in the Metro Detroit area and doing some of these events in Ann Arbor and things to that nature. I should also mention, that we have viewers and listeners across the United States. Our second biggest audience is in the UK. We have people we hear from in Canada, Latin America. We're like all over. I mean, the internet takes you literally worldwide. So if someone is outside of the Metro Detroit area, you mentioned that, sometimes you have in-person workshops, sometimes they're online. So people can still work together with you on this whole life coaching, even if they don't necessarily live in the metro area, correct?
Oh yeah, my coaching is 100% online. So yeah, there's definitely flexibility there. Most coaching is done online. We can do it in person. In fact, I have a client meeting me in person next week. But yeah, all coaching is done online. And once we connect on Facebook or Instagram, that will give you access to any of the online events that are going to be coming up. So lots of exciting stuff coming. So there's definitely ways that we can work together if you're not in the area.
All right. Well, I'm glad we talked about that because I think that's important to clarify. So, Melissa, thank you again for being on the podcast with us. And like I said, we got to have you again on down the road, because I just feel like there's so many other things we could talk about some more. Like when we had you on last time, we talked about the whole, enlightenment and spirituality topic. And shout out again to that boy, Steve Lawrence, big boy Steve, and Bang, who were on with us that day. That's a conversation right there that's so important to have when you're trying to live in recovery and have peace. And spirituality is such a fun topic to talk about too, isn't it?
It is.
Yeah. So on that note, we're gonna have you back and we'll talk some more about that. So anyway, thank you again, Melissa. And for the rest of y'all, we're going to go into the news. We got some interesting stories in the opioid crisis news. We're going to do a couple shout outs, some funny memes, little music news, and then we'll wrap the show up. So, Melissa, thank you again. Have a great rest of the night, and we will talk to you again soon, okay?
Bye, everyone.
Bye. Wow, how cool was that, y'all? We had Melissa Dawn on the program. There we go. And oh my God, I'm serious. I do feel like we could have just sat here talking for another couple hours, but what a great person, and inspirational message from her. I hope y'all enjoyed that. I really do. I was really looking forward to having her on the program. And for anybody who may have joined late, I see we still got lots of people watching and listening. In case you didn't know or you missed it earlier, I mentioned that our co-host and producer, Dean Baker, is not with us tonight. Ordinarily, Dean is on here with us live from Orlando, Florida. Dean had kind of a freak accident happen yesterday. He's okay now, but he broke his leg in a freak motorcycle accident. He had to go into surgery this morning. He's out of surgery and he's doing well, but he wasn't able to do the podcast tonight. And man, we just didn't want to postpone or have to cancel on Melissa. So I'm kind of doing double duties here with, hosting and talking to y'all and trying to adjust all the camera shots and the slides and the videos and everything. I think I did a pretty good job so far. And hey, Dean, if you're watching, I hope you're proud of me, man. Like I've said a few times on tonight's show now, that, man, you just never really realize sometimes how important the rest of your team is. Dean truly is a rock star, y'all, running this show while I'm here running my mouth, week after week after week. And so anyway, let me go ahead and transition into the news, y'all. And tonight we're only going to do this one story that I wanted to talk about because it is a little bit of a different show without Dean and all. And yeah, look at this. I'm trying to get the camera shots. There we go. This week, y'all, if you follow this in the news, Purdue Pharma and their bankruptcy case will be back in court. The U.S. Supreme Court will be reviewing this settlement that, if you follow this story, Purdue settled for billions of dollars in the opioid settlement. Initially, as you can see here in this story, if you look close, originally they settled for $4 billion. It eventually rose to $6 billion. And of course, all that money used to, help clean up the mess created, by the opioid crisis that, all started at the Purdue pharmacy. And of course, there's other big pharmas and pharmacies involved too. But again, the Sackler family, the infamous Sackler family now, was granted immunity from any additional lawsuits, like civil lawsuits, as part of this settlement. And it's now being challenged in the U.S. Supreme Court. And what's interesting about it is you have people on both sides of the fence that are legit victims of this whole opioid crisis. People who, lost sons, daughters, mothers, fathers, family members. I mean, I've said on this podcast many times, I try not to think of myself as a victim. I take responsibility for my own choices. I never should have taken that shit, knowing my history with addiction. I'll also say, I've had people tell me, well, Glenn, you are a victim of this. For God's sake, you got hooked on that shit. It was prescribed to you by a doctor, and I guess I, justified taking it because I had a broken ankle and I had cancer and I was sick and they prescribed that shit to me. So I started taking it. I should have known better with my history of addiction. But I took it anyways. And so I don't know. I mean, I guess in a way I could be a victim of it all had it not been, prescribed as, commonly and all as it was. And, we were all sold up the river, as is a common saying with this whole opioid thing. Maybe that wouldn't have happened to me. In any case, there are people on both sides of the fence with the whole thing. Some say, hey, man, just let's get this settlement settled once and for all so this fucking money can get out there and start helping people. And then there's others saying, oh, no. We ain't settling for this, man. We need to be able to go after the Sackler family and sue them individually and all. And so, here's a little bit more on the story. As it says in the bottom there, the bankruptcy plan was approved by 95% of the victims. But as I just mentioned, there are people on both sides of the fence. So anyway, that was a story from CBS. It's getting headlines all over the news, y'all. Here's a headline we pulled from the New York Times: the fate of billions of dollars for opioid victims from the Sacklers' arrests with the Supreme Court. And if you're interested in following this, y'all, here's one I pulled from PBS. You can actually listen to this live on the PBS website here. And if you look right at the bottom there, it starts in just a few hours. The event is scheduled to start on Monday, December 4th at 6 a.m. Eastern Time. Listen to the proceedings in the player above. So again, if you go to the PBS NewsHour website, you can actually listen in to the Supreme Court proceedings and hearings about what's going to happen with this Purdue Pharma settlement. It's going to be very interesting to see how this plays out. And certainly I'll keep an eye on it. We'll keep an eye on it here at the Dare Me podcast. And I'm sure we're going to be talking about it more as things move along. So, yeah, let's shift gears, y'all. And now we're going to talk a little bit about music news. And I just got to do it one more time, y'all. Shout out to that girl, Romy, who I got to meet last night. Oh, my God. I went to her show in San Francisco. And it was so cool for me because I have been a big fan of Romy for years. She's doing solo stuff now, but she's still a member of the group called the XX with that boy Oliver and Jamie from the XX, who we talked about earlier. But man, she's got this album out right now, Midair, and it has been nominated for Best Dance Electronic Recording. And I just love that kind of music. I've always loved techno, house, club music, that kind of stuff. And I had so much fun there. I really, really did. It was a great time, y'all. So thank you to Romy for taking pictures with me and for doing a shout out. Let's just go ahead and play it one more time, y'all. I'm going to do it right now.
Hi, it's Romy. I'm here with Glenn Victor. Shout out to everyone on the Dare Me podcast.
Yeah. Oh, you rock. Thank you, Romy.
Thanks
How
very
about
much.
that? How about that? Romy gave us a shout out on the Dare Me podcast. I got so starstruck at first, but then once I started talking to her, man, she's just like such a nice person, made me feel so comfortable. And, I got a little starstruck because she knows people like this.
Candidate for album of the year, without question.
Oh my gosh. Wow. Thank you, Elton.
Yeah, that's it, man. She's friends with freaking Elton John. As we talked about earlier in the podcast, she's one of the XX videos for that song "I Dare You" has Millie Bobby Brown in it, Paris Jackson. So it's almost like that whole Kevin Bacon thing by association. She knows all these people, and so by meeting her, I was indirectly, thinking about them people. I was a little starstruck, but she made me feel so comfortable and was just so nice to me. So again, shout out, Romy, if you see this. Thank you for being so nice to me. Let's talk about the Rolling Stones now, y'all. More music news. Unless you've been under a rock, you know that the Rolling Stones put out a brand new album a couple of months ago. Matter of fact, we did a whole segment on one of the Dare Me podcasts a few weeks ago. We called it the Stoned Edition and did a spotlight on the Rolling Stones' new album release called Hackney Diamonds. Matter of fact, we had some recovery messages from that boy, Ronnie Wood. Shout out, Ronnie Wood. If you see this, we love Ronnie Wood. He's in recovery, in case you didn't know. And he's been living clean and sober for, God, I think over 12 years now, or whatever the hell it is. That was a great episode of the show. We talked about him, Eric Clapton, a bunch of other people, Eric Clapton's Recovery Center. And man, that was a good show. Anyway, though, in case you didn't know, the Stones have also announced they're going on tour. And here's the cities. They're going to open in Houston in April and then bounce around to about a dozen different places. And so I couldn't help but share, y'all. If you're a regular follower of the podcast or me on social media or just know me personally, I'm a huge fan of music. Like everybody, I get it. Everybody loves music. It's a little bit of an obsession for me and has been my whole life. And out of all the music that I like to listen to, the Stones have always been my favorite artists. And so, yes, of course, I'm going to the concerts. This is the first ticket I bought, and it's in Santa Clara at Levi Stadium, which is not too far from where I live here in Sacramento. Well, it's a little bit of a cruise, a couple-hour drive by the time I get there, get settled and all that shit. But I definitely bought tickets to that show, which, by the way, is the very last show of the U.S. tour. And, people say this every damn time the Stones come, like, well, this might be the last time you ever get to see them because they're getting old now, and then they just keep coming back, they keep coming back. I'll also say, man, them guys are getting up there, and they're all right around 80 now. So, hopefully they do keep touring for years to come. I'll also say it could be the last time, pardon the pun, if you know Stones music. And I wanted to get a ticket to that very last show that they're going to do on this U.S. tour, and it just so happens to be it's the closest one to where I live here in Sacramento. And if you look closely, you can see they're doing a couple of shows in L.A. before they come to Santa Clara. So I may end up bopping down there too for at least one of them. And then I was thinking, man, I wouldn't mind going to the opening one in Houston. I don't know. I looked online. There's still tickets available for all these shows. I'd love to go back to my second home, Orlando, and I've seen them a couple times in Orlando, a couple times in Tampa, but I'll say, man, they're playing Orlando on June 3rd in an outdoor stadium, man. That's like one of the worst fucking times of year to be in an outdoor stadium in Orlando. It's hot and muggy as hell in Orlando in June. But I got lots of friends and family there, so I may end up going to Orlando in June. But anyway, not to go on and on fangirling Stan about the Stones, but I do at least have my one ticket so far to the show here near Sacramento in the Santa Clara area. But I'm sure there's going to be at least a couple more on this list that I'm going to hit. The one in Vegas, I was kind of hoping was going to be at that new stadium they have there called the Sphere, but it's not. It's at the stadium where the football team, the Raiders, are playing. What do they call it? Allegiant Stadium, I think it is. But who knows, man? I wouldn't be surprised if they end up booking another show and maybe do the Sphere. U2 played there and all that. I think it'd be cool if they did. If they do, I'd love to go to that one, but I'll bet tickets would really be expensive for that one. But we'll see. And yeah, man, I was a little disappointed they didn't have Detroit City on the tour stop this time, my original hometown. But they're going to Cleveland, which is not too far from Detroit. It's a few hour drive, but we'll see. In any case, yeah, that's music news all about the Rolling Stones and Romy. Now we're going to transition into a couple shout outs, y'all. We're getting close to the end of the show. I see we still got people watching and listening. Thank you, y'all, for hanging tough with us for so long. We're coming up on almost 2 hours and 20 minutes into the show, but I couldn't wrap it up without doing a couple shout outs. We want to send one out to that boy, Chris C., one of my friends here in Sacramento. Celebrated 16 years clean this past week, just a few days ago, and he posted this online. I love he does this. I'm going to use that, Chris. I acknowledge the timer, which is kind of a fun way to say it, because at a lot of 12-step meetings, if you're a 12-step person, you know that at some meetings, they'll put a 5-minute timer on people when they start talking or sharing, as we say. And they'll be in the middle of making a point or talking, and the timer will go off, and they'll often say, I acknowledge the timer, that they're going to wrap up pretty quick. So Chris put this out there last year on his anniversary too, and I dig it, Chris. I acknowledge the timer. So I reserve the right to use that too. Hopefully, when my 3-year anniversary comes up again in March. But shout out Chris for acknowledging the timer on 16 years clean. One of the very first people I met in the program and in recovery when I moved to Sacramento. So nice to me and so proud to call you friend, bro. It's been too long since we got together. Hope to see you again soon. Another shout out, gotta send this to that boy Guy B from Detroit City. Oh my God, man. This one, yeah, I'm sorry, y'all. Trying not to get filled up because I've known Guy a long time, and I'm so grateful for his friendship and so proud to call him friend. And he posted this yesterday that he celebrated 38 years clean. Shout out, Guy. And look at this, man. I'm just going to go ahead and fucking read it. I always say on this show, I don't want to read to you, but I'm going to read this one. He posted, on this day, December 2nd, 1985, I made a conscious decision to put down all mind or mood altering substances. Today, I am profoundly grateful for the path I have followed for the last 38 years of my life, a path that has been illuminated by so many. As my journey continues, I get to try to make a difference today in my life and the lives of countless others for the better. I fail sometimes, but I have learned that with continued practice, I have more successes than failures. My recovery is the best representation of my life that I have today. Thank you, everyone. And so, Guy, thank you for posting that, man. And apologies, y'all, for me getting filled up there, but it's like I've known Guy ever since I first walked into my very first NA meeting. If y'all know my story, back in November of 1986. And then my very first clean date, the first time I got clean, was in December of 1986. And I met Guy not long after that, shortly after that. And we've crossed paths many times over the years at different recovery conventions, events, things to that nature. And where I'm going with this, y'all, is when I got clean this last time, and I was literally dope sick in the rooms, as we say, over at that Eastside Alano Club, best home group in the world. It is, too. That's my home group back in Detroit City. I bumped into Guy again. And oh my God, brother, I was just so grateful to see that he was still there, still doing this shit, and helped, how can we say it? Helped me again to get my life back on track, to get through those fucking withdrawals and have some peace in my life and live clean again. So again, y'all, just another example of, this recovery lifestyle. And as I just read to you, and as Guy posted, how man, it just changes lives. So shout out to them boys, Chris C and Guy B, on those milestones this past week. I love you guys both so much. I was talking earlier on this podcast, it was all about the girls today and having Melissa on, and that's true, man. I love strong, independent women like that. I'll also say I love my brothers in recovery, man. And so, yeah, Chris and Guy, shout out to both of y'all. Okay, y'all, we're going to shift gears now. We're almost near the end of the show. We always like to wrap it up with a little bit of humor. And as my grandmother used to say, my granny Argue used to say, no fools, no fun. And I always remember that, man. Me and my siblings, we still joke about that to this day, because she was a lot of fun and she liked to act a fool, as we say. And so, yeah, man, no fools, no fun. So let's have a little fun and a little humor to wrap the show up today. I follow different memes that people post throughout the week. And if you're on social media, you know damn well as I do that this past week, everybody and their brother was posting their Spotify wrap-ups. Spotify sent everybody their music wraps for the year, what songs they listed to the most for artists, how many streams they had, and all that other stuff. Well, I have Spotify. I go on there from time to time, and I have Apple Music, and I go on there from time to time. I'll also say I'm a YouTube premium guy. I love YouTube. YouTube is my platform of choice. And so I saw this out there and I posted it, and I actually had a few people take it from my site and post it. Shout out to that boy Lucas. I saw you reposted this and like mine. Watching the peasants argue over Spotify and Apple Music while you're chilling with YouTube Premium. So anyway, on that note, y'all, I'm going to mention this. that we have some special holiday sessions of editions, I guess you'd say, of the Dare Me podcast coming up. Christmas Eve happens to be a Sunday night. New Year's Eve happens to be a Sunday night. Our co-host and producer Dean Baker and I had already agreed that we were going to go live those nights. We thought about, posting a previously recorded version of the podcast, but we decided we were going to go live anyways. And now, if you're still watching, Dean, and in case anybody else didn't catch it earlier, Dean isn't with us tonight because he broke his freaking leg yesterday. He's doing fine. He went into surgery. He's out of surgery fine. But now that looks like Dean's going to be laid up with a leg and a cast over the holidays, all the more reason we're going to go live probably, with Dean alongside on Christmas Eve and New Year's Eve. And part of the reason I went into that whole thing, y'all, is I have gotten my YouTube premium music recap. I got it. I was going to do it tonight, but I didn't want to take up any more time. I want to spend as much time as we could with that girl, Melissa. And oh my God, that was so great having her on the show. So anyway, I'm going to show my YouTube recap later this month on one of those shows. And maybe I can fit it in next week. Well, next week, actually, though, I'm going to be going live from Orlando. I'll be live with Dean Baker. If he's able, he should be by next week at the Dare Me podcast studio in Orlando. At Dean's studio, the Post Effects Digital Studio. I'll be in Orlando next week. Got a little traveling coming up, going down to Miami to see that boy G Money. If you're a regular viewer, listener to our podcast, you know my son G has been a guest on a few times. He comes on and talk to us about physical fitness and all. And I'm going to visit him and my beautiful daughter-in-law, Juana, in Miami for a few days. That'll kind of be our holiday visit. And then I'm going to jump up to Orlando for a few days, spend a little time with Dean and some others, take care of a little business there before I come back to SAC for the rest of the year. So anyways, yeah, man, I'm going to share my YouTube premium recap of my listening habits this past year. And oh my God, man, I was thinking to myself with one of them, Houston, we may have a problem. Talk about OCD, because it told me what song I listened to the most this past year. Oh my God. I wasn't surprised at what artist it was and what song it was. I was surprised at how many times I've listened to it. Oh my God. I had no freaking idea. Yeah. A little OCD on that. But anyway, if that catches your interest, curiosity, tune in to upcoming Dare Me podcasts. I'm going to reveal all that. All right, y'all, let's show this one. I thought this was a funny meme to show, especially having Melissa on tonight, because I talk a lot on this podcast, and I did at the beginning of the show, how at least for me, I have this connection with the female message in recovery that I think comes from my upbringing. I have 4 siblings that are all, sisters. I have 5 siblings. 4 of them are sisters. So yeah, I was raised that are all older than me. And man, when we were younger, I hated being the youngest. Now that we're all older, I never let them forget who the youngest is. Anyways, I was raised by strong, independent women. And of course, my mother, as I've shared openly on this podcast, I've been married a couple times. I'm friends with both of my ex-wives. Wasn't always that way. We had to work through some stuff, but I love them both dearly. I have a beautiful daughter I love to death. So yeah, man, I just love females. It was so great to have her on tonight. And I also have a female sponsor in the program, in the 12-step program, so I have this unique, at least seems like to me, relationship with females. And there's that old saying, that I don't necessarily agree with, that, guys can't have friendships with females. And I totally disagree with that, because I have some of the best friendships that, I have with members of the opposite sex. And so, sometimes, guys will try to befriend females, though, and they try to grow it into something beyond that. So get out of the friend zone, as we'll say. And so I thought this meme was kind of funny. When a girl replies with, "Oh, thanks," it means she's politely asking you to return to the friend zone that you just tried to escape from. So I actually keep that meme on standby, and when some of my female friends give me the awe treatment, I'll send it to them just to get a good laugh out of them. Anyway, I thought we'd post that one. And now, coming up on the holidays, y'all, I thought this was a good one too. I've been watching a few of you. You're not naughty, you're just fucked up in the head. I thought that was hilarious. Good old Saint Nick, Santa Claus, talking about his naughty list. And, speaking of the holidays, y'all, like I said earlier, for those of y'all that are going to be staying at home on Christmas Eve and New Year's Eve, you got your ticket for the night. Like it says there, stay home and do nothing. And I like this meme because we talk a lot about music and concerts and all that stuff. So they have this ticket stub that your ticket is to stay home and do nothing. And if that's your plan for the holidays, don't forget that we will be here live on the Dare Me podcast Christmas Eve and New Year's Eve. So yeah, yours truly is gonna stay home on those nights rather than going out. And man, yeah, I got some friends that keep talking about this New Year's Eve dance and dinner and speaker meeting and get together here in the Sac area up in Stockton. And I was thinking, damn, I would like to go to that, but I made a commitment, man, that we're going to do the podcast. So if you're a person that's going to be staying home on either of those two nights or both of them, we hope you can join us. And especially if you're a person who may still be struggling with addiction or working on getting clean, or maybe you're just fresh, new clean. The holidays can be a hard time to stay clean. Holidays aren't always a fun time for everyone. It can be a challenging time, old memories, whatever the fuck, maybe strained relationships, things to that nature. You start feeling lonely, you're staying home alone, whatever. Well, jump on the podcast and join us. We'll get you through it. We're not going to put a time limit on it. I mean, for God's sake, I've gone 2.5 hours tonight. Of course, we had that girl, Melissa, on. Thank you again, Melissa, for being a guest on the show. But, as I often say, y'all, I am never at a loss for words. We'll have no problem killing time on Christmas Eve and New Year's Eve, just talking. And I'm sure we'll come up with some fun stuff we're going to do. We'll take live calls. We can put a link in the chat room, bring you on camera. We'll have the chat room open. You know me, I'll have all kinds of videos and slides and fun stuff to talk about and everything. And we'll keep you company on Christmas Eve and New Year's Eve. We go live 6:00 p.m. on the West Coast here in California, where I'm at, Pacific time, and 9:00 p.m. on the East Coast, where Dean's at in Orlando, Florida, all up and down the East Coast. So 6 p.m. West Coast, 9 p.m. East Coast, and whatever your time zone is in between. And as I've said before, too, we know our second biggest audience is those in the UK, and we have viewers and listeners in Canada, Latin America. Last week on the show, we had our friend Awesome from Saudi Arabia on the show, who watches and listens. Shout out, Awesome, if you're seeing this, bro. Thank you so much for being on last week and watching and supporting our podcast. So yeah, man, anyways, we'll be here next week. I'll be live in Orlando, and we may have a special guest on the show. I don't want to say who because I don't have it confirmed yet, but man, keeping my fingers crossed. I reached out, just haven't heard back. Hoping to have a very special guest on the show next week that I've talked a lot on this podcast. So we'll see. Either way, we're going to have a great show in Orlando. I'll be there with Dean next week. And then, of course, Christmas Eve coming up and New Year's Eve, like I just talked about. So with all that said, y'all, I think we've come full circle. I'm going to go ahead and wrap it up. We want to send a shout out again to our friend Dean Baker, our co-host and producer, who's not with us tonight, who's recuperating from surgery after breaking his leg in a freak motorcycle mishap. He's fine, y'all. He's doing good. And, is kind of flying solo here on the podcast tonight. But Dean had a confidence in me, contacted me to let me know he wasn't going to be able to do the podcast tonight. But he said, Glenn, you got this, man. You can do this, and kind of walked me through a few things. That's not easy to say. And I think all things considered, it went pretty smoothly. There were a couple slides I put up that covered my face or Melissa's face. We had her on earlier, but all things considered, I think it went pretty smooth. So, Dean, thank you for your vote of confidence. And like I've said a couple times tonight, though, man, I sure appreciate what you do a whole lot more now, having juggled both, talking and hosting with the production and all the other stuff you do. So thank you. And shout out to Dean. We hope you're feeling better soon. And I hope to see you again next week when I'm in Orlando. And for anybody else, I see we still got people watching and listening. Man, thanks for hanging with us, y'all. And for anybody who comes across the recorded version of the show, shout out to you too. We always appreciate all the love and support we get for the Dare Me podcast. And as we often like to say when we're wrapping up the show, if you're a person that's struggling with addiction, whatever it may be, and you're going through hell, keep fucking going. You will come out the other side. If I can do it, if Melissa, our guest tonight, can do it, all the other people in recovery, that boy Chris C, we talked about in the shout outs, our friend Guy, if we can all do it, you can do it too. You just got to get through the rough part on the front end, get through them withdrawals, and then start working on having some peace in your life, doing some of the things that Melissa talked about with us tonight with her life coaching, getting involved in other things in your recovery like meditation, yoga, eating healthy, exercise, all those things. If we can turn our life around and live happy, joyous, and free with peace, as we say, you can too. So anyhow, y'all, that's it. We'll call it a show tonight. Hope you enjoyed it. I certainly enjoyed doing it. Loved having Melissa on, and we'll go ahead and wrap it up. Let me find. I got to look through the videos here. We have a closing video. See, this is where if Dean was with us, we wouldn't have this. This pause and everything. I just got to find it. Okay, I think I got it, y'all. We're going to go ahead and wrap up the show now with our closing video, and we'll see you next time on the Dare Me podcast. So long.